Hello, this is Goku for Some1, and I'm back this time to do a video response to one of Jack Napier's videos, Top 10 Freakiest, Scariest Horror Icons. And so, this isn't necessarily going to be that. This is going to be who I personally think are the top 10 most iconic horror characters. There's a mix of all kinds on this list. And obviously this list is going to be biased. I think some are more iconic than others. And then if you ask somebody else, somebody who's bigger into horror, they're going to give you another list. And that's what's beautiful about these type of things, is we all have our opinions on this, and there's no correct answer to this. And so this is the best I could come up with. If you don't see a character on this list, then I don't consider them to be the most iconic. And if I didn't recognize a character, they didn't make the list for that reason. But this list is who I consider to be the most iconic horror icons out there. And so let's get started. Number 10, was a little hard to do. I was juggling a couple of characters, but I think I had to give it to Norman Bates. He is a very iconic character. I'm not extremely familiar with him, but he is a very iconic character. He has had a lot of movies, and he is synonymous with early horror movies, early slasher horror films. Not putting him on the list, I think, would have been a disservice. And there's a character I like better that could have been on this list, but I think it would have been a disservice, Norman Bates, not putting him on this list. Number 9 is the Wolfman. This one took me a while to figure out, but then when I saw it, I was like, oh yes, you gotta put the Wolfman. He's considered Universal Monsters, but he's this character that's been around. He is like the spawn of werewolves. He's the werewolf people think of when you think of werewolves, and he's just an iconic character. I mean, now, number 8, yet again, is a Universal Monster, is in that category, even though a lot of these characters are public domain, and you can switch them, but I put the Mummy, because the Mummy is just this frightening concept, and you can do so much with the Mummy, because there's so many ideas you can do when talking about this, and how you do it, and the various things you can do with it. And the Mummy is just this frightening thing because it invokes the coming back from the dead, and the idea of what if you're dealing with something that can resurrect? How do you kill something that comes back from the dead? The next one is a character I wasn't really going to put on the list, horror icon, but then I realized technically it is a horror icon, and he is very, very, very iconic, so not putting him on the list I think would have been a disservice to his character, and that's King Kong. King Kong is a character that I consider his movie to be more of an adventure film, but he's still iconic, and he's a monster. And he's an animal monster, but he is still a monster. And he still does monstrous things, not meaning it, but he does do them. So you can argue that one, but I put him on the list. So yeah. The next one is kind of in the line with the Mummy. Now, this is going to be 2, and the reason being is I cannot... and this isn't one of these cheats where I have 2 characters that I really want to put both of them on. No, this is where literally I don't know who you would consider from this franchise to be the villain, because I think arguably you can make an explanation, and that's Frankenstein's monster and Victor Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein is a monster. He really is. But when you think iconically, you think Frankenstein's monster. And a lot of people think that's Frankenstein. No, that's just the monster. But he's more iconic. But then Victor Frankenstein is kind of the monster of the movie. It's kind of like the real bad guy. So it's kind of hard to separate those two. Next on it, we get into what most people consider horror icons, and that is Freddy Krueger. Yes, Freddy Krueger. Can you really have an iconic list without Freddy Krueger? I don't think so. Freddy Krueger, the idea of going into somebody's dreams and the concept of that is frightening. The one area you should be safe, you're not safe. When you're sleeping, that should be a time when you're safe and nothing can harm you. Well, not in his franchise. Next, we have Jason Voorhees. Yeah, the hockey mask, that entire concept. Yet again, we get into a character who later in franchises keeps coming back from the dead. How do you kill something like that? The whole basic concept. I mean, I was figuring out who was going to be the top of this category of characters, and yet again, we get into number 3. Michael Myers, I think, is arguably, of this type of thing, is the most iconic. And he is so iconic. Everybody knows, most people know who Michael Myers is, even if they're not a horror fan. And even though he might not be my favorite of this brand slasher characters, he deserves to be on this list. He deserves to be where he is. And he is extremely iconic. Hopefully people won't bash me for putting him at number 3. But yet again, I don't think he is the most iconic. Number 2 is Godzilla, the king of monsters. The most iconic monster of them all. Yes, he is super iconic. Everybody knows who Godzilla is. And if you don't consider Godzilla a horror character, then watch the first movie. That's a horror movie. It's dealing with things beyond our control. It's dealing with, and unlike a lot of slasher movies, which slasher movies are great, they're fine, they're fun movies, but this literally is a threat on a global scale. This is, if we don't stop this, humanity could be wiped off the map, because this monster could actually do that. And none of our weapons are effective against it. That would be, wow, a lot scarier than a guy who can go in your dreams. A monster who can destroy buildings, skyscrapers. To me, that's horrific. That is, wow, that is really horrific. Now we get into number 1, the daddy of them all. He is considered a universal monster, but he is also a public domain character, and I think he's the most iconic. I really do, and that is Count Dracula. Count Dracula is a character who he is the most famous of the vampires, and vampires are horror characters through and through. The concept of something that's basically immortal, but then it has powers, many powers. It's not like somebody who is resistant to pain. No, this thing can throw you across the room. It can fly, can turn into a bat mist. Vampires are extremely powerful. Yes, they have a lot of weaknesses, but that's to offset the fact that they're so powerful. And Dracula tends to be, in some narratives, the most powerful of the vampires. And in some narratives, sunlight doesn't even kill him. It just turns him into a human, or weakens him in some fashion, whatever they want to do. I've seen turn into a human. I've seen where he can't move, kind of like kryptonite. And I have seen where it kills him. But yeah, Dracula is so iconic. I mean, everybody knows who Dracula is. And Dracula is this extremely iconic character that when I think of horror, I think of Dracula. That is who I think of. That is what I think of. Yet again, yeah, there are these slasher characters, and there are these iconic characters of nowadays, and people think of them when they think of horror today. But these characters exist because of characters like Dracula. Dracula was there long before it, over 100 years old, and the concept that a character is so great. I love Dracula. So this was Goku for the Sim 1. Please leave a comment below. Tell me what you think, and I'll see you next time. YouTube.